Hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Ingerai, and my talk today is going to be about why wetlands are important. So, to start with, you may need to know what a wetland is. I do realize that we all just took an aquatic botany class, so I'm not going to bog you down with the details, pun intended. But basically, what a wetland is where wetland plants are adapted to, and an area that is either saturated above ground or below ground by salt water or fresh water or brackish waters. So the types of wetlands and their names are as diverse as the benefits are, but bear with me, I'm going to read you this list just to drive a point home. But the different types of wetlands are swamps, marshes, billabongs, oxbows, lakes, lagoons, salt marshes, mudflats, mangroves, bogs, fens, peatlands, muskies, pocossins, mires, moors, palustrine, riparian, estuarian, marine, lacustrine, etc. So basically, it's just a long-winded way to show you that there's a lot of different wetlands out there. There's a lot of different means of water flow input into wetlands or lack of water flow input into wetlands, and just how these names can be diverse regionally or because they're different abiotic inputs. Wetlands are also extremely diverse biologically. So if each one of these wetlands had, like, 100 different species in it, that would still be pretty diverse, but there's thousands and thousands of species out there. So basically, I took some numbers from just the U.S. alone. So within the U.S., there are over 800 protected migratory bird species, and 400 of those, so half of the protected migratory birds, rely on wetlands as relay points between different localities that they're migrating to. And then on top of that, 1/3 of U.S. threatened and endangered species are actually in wetlands. So these include all of the endangered plants and animals in the U.S., 1/3 of which rely on wetlands for their existence or are found in wetlands. And then for plants, there are over 7,000 specialized plants in America that are adapted to be in wetlands, and a majority of those are adapted to only be in wetlands. And then finally, wetlands also serve as wildlife nurseries. So other animal species that may not typically be in a wetland will migrate to the wetland to give birth or lay eggs or whatever that they're doing. And it basically acts like a nursery for many other ecosystems outside of the wetland. All right. And then another hot topic today's is climate change. So unlike land plants, wetland plants are known for this thing called blue carbon sequestration. So blue carbon sequestration is the same thing as carbon sequestration, but it occurs in aquatic environments. But it has been shown to be 10 times more carbon sequestration than in land plants. That's probably due to the amount of algae that's in the water, but basically all these aquatic systems or wetland systems, they basically trap carbon, and they store it as either biomass, or they'll store it as a underneath the soil. So that could happen by either being in the roots, and then when the plant dies back, it's trapped under there, or whenever the plant dies and falls over, it gets buried and it can be covered in sedimentation, and it's trapped there unless it's like disturbed by human activity or something of the sorts. Okay, and then one major one that we've kind of been dealing with lately with the hurricanes and everything is wetlands protect against storm surge, and they also serve for erosion control. So the way that they do this is they dramatically slow down water. A lot of these emergent plants that are sticking out of the water, or even plants that are anchored into the soil, basically, can slow down the water. They also can protect against or buffer against strong incoming winds, and it's been estimated that 3 miles of wetland can actually reduce the storm surge by 1 foot. So if you have 9 miles of wetland, that's 3 foot less of storm surge. So 3 foot might not seem like a lot, but when you're only 4 feet above sea level, that could be a really huge deal. And then it's also been shown that wetlands can basically save the country $23.2 billion per year in storm protection. So that's a pretty significant number. So they're economically important, which I'll get into a little bit later. All right, and then we also just recently had a lab on wastewater treatment. So, as you know, there was the lab where Dr. Irvin went to the wastewater treatment facility, but then he also mentioned in another one that there's different man-made wetlands that they use as wastewater treatment, and he went into depth about how they take up more space and everything, but they can save a lot of money in in their filtering of the water. But basically, much like a water treatment plant, they filter large particles all the way down to these fine-sized particles, and then they can do chemical change by, the roots releasing oxygen, and then the microbial or the aerobic microbial community will break down these different chemicals like fertilizers and such, so they're not as bad for the environment. And then in addition to this just natural filtering that you would see like that, they can also do something significant, or the plants can rather, and this would be to remove heavy metals from the water. So they can remove many different metals that would otherwise get into fish that people might eat. But one plant that's been known to do this is salix. So this is a willow tree. So salix can take up copper, zinc, cadmium, selenium, silver, chromium, uranium, and petrochemicals. It says that they can also take up many other chemicals. So, mercury has been a problem in fish before. So, it's nice to have these areas that can take up toxins. And then, as a filtration system, it's also important as a reservoir system. So 2 ways it's important as a reservoir system is first is it works in flood control. So if you think about taking like a 5 gallon bucket and dumping it on your kitchen counter, if you do that, it's just gonna pour everywhere because there's nothing to stop the flow of water. But if you think about if you had like a giant foam mattress on top of your kitchen counter and then you dumped a bucket of water in it, it's just gonna soak into this foam like a sponge, and then it'll slowly be released and then pour out on the floor. So basically what a wetland does is it acts like a sponge. When you have the rainfall into the area, the water will go through all the different surface areas of the plant and through the soil and everything. It'll be filtered, and then as it dries out and it's not raining, it'll be slowly released in these streams. But also, it can go through the ground and help fill aquifers. So one major example of this is the Miami-Dade County Water aquifer. So the Biscayne Aquifer is the name of it. But basically, the Florida Everglades are filtering water that gets fed into this. And this is an image showing the Everglades on the left that are symbolized by these trees, and then the aquifer below. But then you see that this salt water is trying to make its way into the aquifer, but the constant flow of fresh water from the wetlands is pushing that out, so the city has fresh drinking water. Alright, and then another thing wetlands do is they help other ecosystems. So some ways that they do this is there's the physical protection that they provide from destruction. So they buffer the storm surges that I talked about and winds coming through. Then they can also help to reseed other ecosystems if they've been damaged somehow, whether it be through natural things like those storm surges or fires downstream, or if some man-made thing has happened, like maybe we tore out this region for some reason. What will happen is either some vegetative material can get released and float downstream, or get stuck to a bird or something like this. And the same thing can happen with seeds. Animals can carry seeds from these wetlands into these other areas. And then additionally, they provide food for animals that come along. and are on their way to other ecosystems. So say you have these bird species that are coming through and they play a vital role in another ecosystem, but they need some sustenance on their trip. They stop in these wetlands and then they get food, so they're kind of like maintaining the biodiversity of other ecosystems. And then again, there's the nurseries thing. So there's like many fish species that typically would live out in the ocean, but then they need this brackish estuary waters to lay their eggs in conditions that aren't so violent or hostile for their offspring to be raised in or grow up on their own. And all right, and then some people would argue one of the more important aspects of a wetland, at least for like management purposes, would be the economic impact that they have. So as I said earlier, they provide nurseries for small fish, so it's important for fisheries. There's also many fishes and shellfish and stuff that are living in these wetlands. They're also a good source of timber. So a lot of woods come out of the wetlands, such as cypress. So bald cypress is a good rot-resistant wood that people make siding from or outdoor furniture. So it's a good timber source. It's also used for ecotourism. So people, I know you've seen like the Louisiana fan boats. People go try to see alligators in the Everglades and stuff like that. So they're pretty cool places to visit. They protect property, obviously, from the storm surge thing that I was telling you about earlier. If it protects $23.2 billion a year in storm protection, then it's definitely protecting property. Um, and then biodiversity is something that's important to the economy. You never know if the next medicine is going to be found in the wetland or whatever. So, or if you have a higher biodiversity, you're not having to invest in keeping other species alive because maybe they can benefit each other. And they also make good educational areas. I mean, we're taking aquatic botany class, so we're obviously getting educated here, but there's other fields like wildlife and fishery managements that people coming through school to learn that can be taught in these wetland areas too. And then they're also highly productive areas. So they're much more productive than some dry areas. So like you could think of rice fields are pretty important to Asia and a lot of the world. So then there are also just there's the aesthetic aspect. So wetlands are gorgeous. I mean, look at this photo right here. I mean, you got this cool sunset and these crazy flowers. So yeah, I think this is something to consider too. Is it doesn't necessarily have to serve a purpose. It's just a really great place that should be maintained. So this is the summary of why wetlands are important. So wetlands are important to buffer against climate change. They protect against erosion and storm surges. They also protect against floods. Um, they work as a filtration system, and they offer reservoir capabilities. They feed these reservoirs. They are a hotspot for biodiversity. They help other ecosystems. They're important to the economy, and they're aesthetically pleasing. Finally, you've learned all this stuff about wetlands, so maybe you want to know how to protect your wetlands. So, some ways that you can protect your wetlands are look for food that has been obtained through sustainable fishing. A lot of times, they've had these mangrove areas that have been cleaned or cleared out for shrimping. So, you want to make sure that your fish and food products are not coming from unsustainable fishing. You also don't want to promote the disturbance of wetlands because it can release that carbon into the atmosphere. You don't want to litter as well because anything that you throw down can get washed into a river or ultimately into a wetland. If you have to use pesticides, use them sparingly and along with fertilizer because all this stuff goes in the wetlands. And then finally, avoid planting non-native plants and bringing invasive species around because ultimately they'll escape, and we've seen many cases of that in this class. So anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any questions, feel free to message me in the discussion. All right, have a good one.